world is paying respect to Dr. Henry Kissinger, who passed away today in Kent, Connecticut. To me, Dr. Henry Kissinger is a great statesman, a great diplomat, a scholar of world class, a man who has a commanding view of history and the present world, and also always eager to forecast into the future. Moreover, he is indeed, more importantly, single-handedly assisting former President Richard Nixon in opening the door between China and the United States back in 1971. In a sense, Dr. Henry Kissinger devoted his whole life to not only opening the door between China and the United States, but also nurturing China-US relations, taking care of this most important pair of bilateral relations in the world. In that sense, I think everyone in China and in the United States, and more generally in the world, should be grateful for Dr. Henry Kissinger for his farsight, vision, wisdom, courage, and also extraordinary view of the world. I was honored to be his interpreter in 1985 and in 1987 when he visited China as a private citizen, and he was met with Mr. Deng Xiaoping and all the other important Chinese government and party leaders. When I was applying to Yale University for my doctorate degree, Dr. Henry Kissinger was kind enough to write letters of recommendation for me. In that sense, I'm personally very grateful to Dr. Henry Kissinger. In more recent years, I've been advocating one theory called inevitability of peace between China and the United States. It's partially based on important views expressed by Dr. Henry Kissinger, who kept saying that war is not an option between China and the United States. I think Dr. Henry Kissinger's legacy is not only for the past 50 years or so, his legacy will continue to guide the Chinese people and the American people when we go forward to embrace peace between these two greatest nations in the world and do whatever we can to prevent any possibility of an outbreak of war between China and the United States. I think we need to learn from the historical perspective that Dr. Henry Kissinger always brought to any issue that he was thinking about. He could think back to not only the 19th century, but all the way to the Asian Roman period. I accompanied Dr. Henry Kissinger to visit the Shanxi Museum in Xi'an. And I still remember he paused for a couple of minutes in front of the exhibition of the Kreuzbau. And he compared the Chinese Kreuzbau with the Roman Kreuzbau. And he came up with his own observations and comments. And today, China-US relations are really under a lot of duress and a lot of pressure. But I think he would look at China-US relations in the framework of the last 53 years ago, the last 100 years, or even the past several hundred years. And he will not stop there. He will look forward into the future, into the middle of this century, the 21st century, and into 100 years later or 200 years later. And I fully agree with Dr. Henry Kissinger in that very broad historical brush, looking back several hundred years, looking forward several hundred years. Probably you need to think about China-US relations in a matter of 1,000 years. In that historical framework, you will agree with Dr. Henry Kissinger that China and the United States need to get along with each other, respecting each other's differences, and also deal with these differences in a positive way. I want to continue to advocate the legacy of Dr. Henry Kissinger, to urge all of us to embrace peace between China and the United States, and to firmly conclude that there is an inevitability of peace between China and the United States. I think this is the best way for all of us to remember Dr. Henry Kissinger as a person, as a statesman, as a historian, as someone who really is so dedicated to promoting peace and friendship and cooperation between China and the United States. Dr. Henry Kissinger was truly a very rare asset. You do not come across a great statesman like Dr. Henry Kissinger in your normal days of life. However, one thing we can all learn from Dr. Henry Kissinger is his commitment to study history. He always reads a lot of history. He writes about history. I hope politicians in Washington, D.C., in the Congress, in the government, as well as in the military, should also read about history. When you really read history, when you really can bring a historical perspective of 100 years, 500 years to any contemporary issue we are faced with, then you will be more realistic. You become more pragmatic. You will no longer be a hothead, for example. You will more be balanced and rational and reasonable, for example. And then you will also start to appreciate the Chinese wisdom that don't do unto others what you do not want others do unto you, because this will be a very important guiding principle, especially between two great countries like China and the United States,